Welcome to Geiranger and welcome to the Union Hotel. I will now show you some of the history of the village and history of the hotel in my private small museum in the hotel. So we can walk here and I can show the way to the museum where some of my cars are, and with the history of this small village from 1869. My name is Carl Mjelvam. I'm the third generation at the hotel, and now I'm retired. My son, Sindre, is taking over. He's the fourth generation, and he and his wife is running the hotel now. This picture behind here shows 50 open 7-seat cars, all belonging to Geiranger, to the village. In the fjord, there was a cruising liner just arrived, and the people have taken the car up to the Djupåshytta, the hotel up there, for coffee and tea and cakes. And now I show you the rest of the museum with some of the cars. The first ship that came to Geiranger is a small cruising liner, not compared to the ship today. It's up there, and the ship came, it was in the afternoon, and on the ship it was a family called Beckhouse from England. And they were all Quakers, and they came to Norway as missionary for the Quakers movement. And I went ashore in Geiranger and gave out literatures about their Quakers. When they were finished, they asked the farmer if they could take them up hills with a horse carriage. And the farmer did so, and this is the first time we know that was taking people up hills and got money for it. And so the farmer, later on, when they saw a ship coming into Geiranger, they went to the port and got transport up hills, and they earned money, more and more, in the future. In 1881, there was a start on building a road over the mountain, up hills. And it was a very important road for the tourist traffic. We had many nice bands and wonderful view from the road all the way up to the top of the mountain. And it was finished in 1889. In 1899, my grandparents came to this port, and because they have bought the Union Hotel, and I was going to run it for many years later. They started to run the hotel in 1999, and they had many tourists coming, and little by little come more and more foreigner tourists from other countries, not only the Norwegian. And then they got also some small complaints. There was aware that usually there was a light in the rooms, but there was no light, only candle they used in the rooms. And my grandfather, he said, okay, we have to do something about it. And they built a water power station soon after, who produced light for the hotel. And that was a big success. Later on, they was complaining about there was no heat in the rooms. Okay, he said, then we start producing our own heats. And he started a small factory producing heats for the rooms, and he sold small heater all over Norway afterwards. So that was a quite good success. At the same time, in 1907, the Geiranger valley and the independent and the people in Geiranger, they wasn't quite satisfied with the way they handled the transport over tourists, because there was some farmer that got all the transport, and the farmer up in the valley didn't see the ship coming, and they didn't get any benefit of all the tourists. And they said, we have to do something, and then they decided they found an organization they called Geiranger Skyslag, GS Geiranger. You see on all the cars there was marked on the back door GS Geiranger. The Geiranger Skyslag organized so that all the farmers got transport from the cruising lot coming, and the whole village was very happy. It was equal for everybody. That was very important. In 1911, my grandfather, he bought a French car. He liked to have a car that took more than 2 people, as the horse carriage only had 2 people, 2 tourists. And it was a 7-seat car, but it was a disaster. Because as soon as the car came to a hill, it started boiling. And he had a big problem to getting up the steep hills in Geiranger. And at the same time had to go around the bend was also a problem for that car. So he sent the car back to Oslo, and then he went together with a friend to Opel factory in Germany and asked Opel if they could build chassis with stronger engine, better chilling, and better steering. And the Opel factory built special chassis for Geiranger and for Norway. And I imported one chassis that was 7 seats. He imported the chassis and he started building the body on the top of the chassis. There were 2 types he had, one with 7 seats and one with 9 seats, Opel. And this was a big success. He went up the hills and down again without any problem. In 1914, the First World War came to Geiranger. And there was always at one stop with tourists, no tourists. And he couldn't get anything from the Opel factory. And it was stopped producing the body of cars in Geiranger in his factory there. So he had only one car left. And that car he sold to northern Norway. But the man who bought the car, he could not drive it. And there was nobody in the northern Norway that were able to drive a car. So he sold a car, including a driver, up to that man. And he was very happy. It was a 9 seats, big one. He was driving the car, but during the war there was so few tourists that there was not so much to do. In 1926, the traffic was starting again, and the Geiranger village decided that they have to change transport, how they transport people, because on a horse carriage, only 2 people that were sitting on the horse carriage. That was nothing with all the cruising line that was coming in the future. So they decided to change to buy cars. And they decided that 5 families went together to buy a car. And we had a small bank in Geiranger, and they told the Geiranger people that if there was anybody that not had enough money to buy a car, they will give them the money so that they can have a car and to have shared the profit that the car was given to everybody in Geiranger. In 1930s, when it was problem all over the world with unemployment and so on, it was no problem in Geiranger because of the car. Because they had the income from the car, and there was many tourists came to Geiranger, even if there was a problem. After 3 years, they could buy a new car because they had not enough money. And the man who was driving, he was a very happy man because he had a whole year's salary in only 2.5 months driving because he got so much tip. And why he got so much tip was that the Geiranger Skyslag, the organization, they hired a man. So during winter, he learned them how to speak English and a little German and how to behave. So they know how to behave, and they was very polite, and they got tip, of course. It was quite unusual at that time to speak English. So in the 1950s, there was 50 open cars in this small village. It was more cars per person in Geiranger than in New York or in London. So it was quite unusual that it was so many cars. But then the Second World War came, and the Germans took Norway, and there was no tourists, and they was not allowed to drive cars. And the Germans came in 1943 and took all the cars and brought them out of the village. And we got them back in 1945, and then they started to repair the cars. And then I started in 1947, 48 to drive from cruising line. I was coming back. But I decided then I have to change these old cars, and I have to buy new cars. And on the same year, all the 50 cars came for sale, and of course the prices went down. For 350 kroner, you can get a very nice car from Geiranger. And there was young people that came and buy the cars because it was so cheap, and I destroyed it after a few years. And there was farmer who bought the car, and I used them as tractors. Of course, in a few years there was damage too. But there was some man, 2 brothers, that came and bought the best car in Geiranger and sold them outside to Holland and Belgium and to the state. And I will tell you a story about one of the cars that was sold to America. It was a Nash 1931 model. And this car was bought by some house owners that had plenty of money. And they paid, I don't know how much they paid for the car, but it was brand new, and it was one of the best and not the cheapest car. Because they would like to show people how wealthy they were. This car was sold to America, and I got the address of the man that bought it, but he was dead. And after 7 years, I found the daughter of the man, and I asked her if she had a Nash in the garage, and she said, yes, I have a Nash. It's been standing there for 30 years since my father died, she said. And I asked her to look on the back door, and she said, yes, there's standing some figures on the back doors. GS is standing there. But my father, she said, had tried to paint it over, but he had not covered it quite well, so you could see it. And I told her that this car is belonging to Geiranger, so I would like to buy it back. And it was sold for 1,870 kroner. And it was the highest price for any car in Geiranger at that time. And I asked her to sell it back for the same amount, but she couldn't. And she was a businesswoman, and we have to discuss it quite hard. But I got the car, and I have forgotten how much I paid for it. Inside is the original leather, and painting is original, and the engine is original. So the car is like it was in 1931, and is running marvelous, no problem at all. This is a story about the grey car in Geiranger, 1931. Yeah. In the corner here, we have a Studebaker from 1925. This Studebaker was produced usually in America in 1925, closed. There was no open Studebaker except 5 Studebaker that were sold to Europe. And this is one of the 5, probably the only one that's left. And they call it in America for Big 6 because the engine was so big and was so powerful that it was called the Big 6 in America. It goes very well, and we're driving always to Oslo from Geiranger in one day with that car. This car, it's a Hudson from 1922. The Hudson was a very good car, but much cheaper than the Studebaker. And in 1922, there was 8 cars like that in Geiranger, because it was cheap and it used much less petrol than the other one. And it was they like it very much, the drivers. They were easy to drive too. Then we have the Page here. It's quite an unusual car. I think the only one in Norway, maybe in Europe. And this car, we had 4 cars like that in Geiranger. And when they're going to repair this car, it was some years ago, they have to use spare parts for the 3 other cars that have been used in Geiranger to get one car. And then we have another car here, that's a Cadillac. The Cadillac was a very good car at that time. It was one of the first that came with V8 engine in the small cars. And this car was very well car in Geiranger. They had 4 Cadillacs in Geiranger. This is one of them. And it was no problem with the heatings up the hills because there was a very good heating, which are special good for this car. And the engine was very strong and it runs up and down without any problem at all. So it was a very good car. Then we have this car, that's a Buick from 1932. In 1932, they produced only 125 Buicks of this kind, open 7 seats, 1932. Because there was the first car that came with synchronized gearbox. That was quite new at that time. The royal family of Norway has been sitting in this car several times. And we have this, if there is a wedding in the hotel, the bride can come down and pick up the car she would like to drive to the church. And this is one of the cars so used to be the favorite in the weddings. Then we have this, that's a Studebaker from 1932. As I told you, the Studebaker was very good car, but also a very expensive car at that time. So this car, when I got this one, I was missing some figures on the top here and down there. And I was asking the Studebaker Club in America to if they could tell me how to find it, a new one. And they asked for a picture of the car, and I sent them a picture, and they wrote me back and said, this is the only one that exists in the whole world. I said, oi, I didn't expect that. And then they told me that the body of this car was made in Holland, because they usually send the chassis over by boat, and then it was easy to have a factory in Holland that produced the car. And this car, special car, was produced in Holland, the body. That car that had the biggest engine in amongst all my cars. So, and it's very good to drive, so it's a very handy car, very handy car. This is a Mercer Touring from 1918. A man was going to Oslo to buy a car, and he bought the car, an open 7-seat car, but then he found this car. He found it a very handy car, very little, not so big one like the other one. And he bought that too. And then he started driving with that car in Geiranger, taking tourists up the hills. It was very well, but it was a bit smaller than the other one, so it was only for 6 persons, not 7 persons. But the engine was good, there was no problem at all. But then they have to sell it to buy another one, and they sold it to a farmer nearby, and the farmer used the car as taxi at the beginning, but in 1940 they have to stop using the car because they was not allowed to drive cars in Norway during the war. So then he put it in his garage. And in 1945, when the war was over, he bought a tractor to the farm. And then he took this car out of the garage and put the tractor in the garage. And he put this car out in the forest amongst the fruit trees he have. And the children would start playing in the car, and it was destroyed completely, and was standing outside in rain and snow and everything. So we were standing there, and the farmer, he didn't bother about the cars. There was coming a man from Oslo, and he said he would like to buy the car, and he was asking for how much price. He said, if you take the car away, it doesn't cost you anything. I would like to be quit the car as soon as possible. And the man from Oslo, he took the car over the mountain to Oslo. He used 4 days to tow the car all the way to Oslo. And in Oslo, there was a man that bought the car from the first one, and he started to repair the engine. And when he finished to repair the engine, he got ill and he died. And the widow would not sell the car. She kept it for many years. But I went to her and told her that I'm going to have a museum. I would like to have the car because this was not a usual car, quite an unusual car. And she said, okay, you can buy it. And I started in 1968 to collect spare parts for the cars. And it was quite a job because I hired a man and he was going to America often in other occasions, and then he looked for the spare parts in America. And little by little we found enough parts to start renovating the cars. So we started in 2005 and was finished at 2013 with the cars. So the whole cars is taken apart, and every needle of the cars has been taken, and the rest is finished, and then we have all the cars put together again. So the engine of the car is completely restored, and if you see the engine, it looks like a new one. It's coming from the factory. And when this car was new, the factory promised that it should go 120 kilometers an hour. That's quite a lot for a car from 1918. The Mercer factory usually produced racer cars at that time. And the racer cars in 1914, 15, and 16 was winning all the run in America. It was very popular. And the engine of this car is from a racer car, and the the gearbox is from the racer car. So we have 4 gears forward and 1 gears backward. So it's quite unusual with 4 gears in this hill. And it runs marvelous now. But I'm almost a little bit afraid to use it too much because it's a very valuable car. The most valuable we have in this collection, I think. Then we came to this Ford, T Ford. My grandfather, he didn't got anything from Opel in Germany during the First World War. When he found a chassis, new chassis for the Ford 1916 model. And then he was starting building the body on that chassis. And the hotel used the car to drive up and down from the village up to the hotel at Geiranger if people like to take a trip down to the village and to pick up people on the small boat that's coming in. But in 1928, they sold the car. It was a bit small for the hotel, only 4 passengers. They sold the car to a farmer, and the farmer used it on his farm, first as private car, but then he built it up to a tractor. And he used this as tractor all the way to 1962. Then he sold it. The body was taken care of by a man nearby, and he sold the body to a man in Oslo. He was the chief of the Technical Museum in Oslo. And he was going to put it together and build it up again when he was retired. But when he retired, he got ill and couldn't do anything. And now some years ago, I bought the rest of the car, the rest of all the spare parts I collected, and the body that my grandfather had built. I got this, and I start building up again, and after 2 years' time, it's standing there like a new car now. It runs good, no problem. It's a memory of my grandfather that was building cars in Geiranger. This car I've not told you anything about. It had a special history. It's a Buick from 1931. In Geiranger, where they had so many cars, of course we had to have a good mechanic that was repairing the cars. And we had a man called Martin Mølsæter. He was a very, very clever man. And he could end it all. If you had a problem with the car, you could ask Martin. He knows what was wrong with the car. And if you was going to buy a car, you have to ask Martin. If he said, yes, this is a good car, you bought the car. If he said no, you didn't buy the car. And when Martin was 70 years old, he retired. He closed the garage and starting on his hobby. It was to restore cars. And he restored 2 cars he had. And when he was 84 years old, he was finished with those 2 cars. And his son came to me and say, my young father, only 84 years old, has nothing more to do. And he knows that I had a 31 Buick standing in my garage in a very, very bad condition. And I couldn't do anything myself, and I had not enough money to hire people to do something. So I said, okay, Martin is going to get the car very cheaply, so he can stay alive some more time. And then Martin started, 84 years old, with this car, and took the car apart, the whole car, took out the engine, changing all the tires, changing all the wires. And then he's starting, in age of 90 years, to sew the roof of the car. and it's very, very hard work to sew the roof to get it good. And when he was finished with that, he started sewing the leather inside. And the sewing machine he used he got from his father. It's from 1850. It was a small machine. It had only one problem. When the string broke and he was going to put the string through the needle, he had to go to the neighbor's wife, and she helped him with a string and a needle, and then he started sewing again. So when he was 93 years old, the car was finished, and he phoned me up and asked me to come down, and we can go for a ride, he said, with the car. He was very proud, and we went down, and he was sitting behind the steering, and we drove up the hills in October in Geiranger. No other traffic, but the car was running marvelous, and he was very proud that he could finish the car at the age of 93 years old. The year after, Martin died. This was the history of the cars from Geiranger and the history of the Mjelva family that been here for 4 generations. We hope you feel well. I hope you enjoyed the trip round with the cars. Thank you.